Good morning. I am sorry I am late. I was getting ready and didn't even get my hair dry. And I'm like, oh crud, it's 9 o'clock. I'm Stacy. Y'all, this is Walking in My Shoes, and we are loving my veteran this morning. So I'm going to give everybody a minute because I am a few minutes late to pop on and see where we are at. Got to drink some coffee this morning because God knows I need it. It's one of those rainy mornings here in southeast Georgia. If you don't like the weather, wait a few minutes and it will change. I promise you. So heads up, y'all. We have Let's Talk tonight. It is at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Please join us for Let's Talk tonight. It is by Zoom. The links are in the group. I'll make sure I post the ones out there again to make sure we're all on the same page. But I will put them on there tonight. Boot camp is filling up like almost full. I've gotten people who've sent messages or made posts that they haven't gotten their applications. If you have not gotten one for whatever reason and you've sent your email, please, please, please message us so we can get those in because I'm serious. We have such limited space available. Stephanie's Wellness Wednesday was wonderful as usual. About letting things just go and not making this multi-layer cake, and it was amazing because it was like she was in my life. I got yours, yes, Sarah. Um, it was like making, this is my life. Carl's actually said, hey, the dishes will wait, and my house is dusty, so I need to talk to Stephanie on the phone today because I usually put my headphones in. And when Stephanie and I are talking, I decide that's when I'm going to dust the house, so I multitask that way. But it was a really good, just take a few minutes for yourself and put things on the back burner side. So that also happens and it also helps when you're out there with that too. So just keep that in mind. It was really good. So we're getting ourselves together here. Those of you who have put in applications, by Monday, you will get a new letter back from us. We're trying to wait for these last little ones to come in sometime Monday afternoon, and it will be to the applicants and some of the things that we're going to accomplish, need. And there's going to be lots of surveys, questions, those kind of things to go out as well. If anybody else wants to just participate in some surveys, we're going to have those available on our group page. Those will be private surveys and it will not have like your name and all that good stuff in them. Just so we can kind of see where you feel about your veteran, things we need to address. We need to talk about more because sometimes people are afraid to say what they want, and this way we can just kind of put that out there. So today is going to be my day to have a conversation. I'm going to talk about me personally, and I'm going to talk about how my PTSD and what I feel personally. And I've talked to some other veterans, and this seems to be the common thread. So we're going to talk about my personal PTSD. I understand it is not combat related. I fully get that. I do think combat related PTSD is significantly different, but we don't all walk in each other's shoes, so we don't all know exactly what the other one experienced, and we don't all bring the baggage with us. I have PTSD. I've had it. I don't know how long I've had it. It's come from my years in EMS, years and years and years of seeing an event and moving on, and seeing an event and moving on, and seeing an event and moving on. We all have. I mean, we have them. It tends to be something that we have. They're now seeing that first responders rates are climbing. I don't think they're climbing any more than they used to. It's just it's being acknowledged now, and so for me, I would see this traumatic event, and I put it on hold and went on the next call. You saw this traumatic event or you saw this tragedy, you put it on hold and you went on the next call and you did your job. Well, the difference is at the end of my shift I could go home. And so sometimes it was 12 hours, sometimes I was home 24 hours, and I didn't really think about it. It was just not one of those things I ever processed. And I remember early on some of my first calls, and just the fear they instilled in me was like, we went to this really, really, I worked in podunk country, and we went to this area, this community to get a patient, and it was pouring down raining. It was the middle of the night. I had driven an ambulance maybe 3 days because you had your orientation. I was a brand new EMT, and I can remember my partner saying when we got in here, be super careful. I don't want you to get out of the ambulance. I'm like, what? And he's like, do not get out of the ambulance. I'm literally grabbing the patient and we are running. I want you, when I get out, to put the ambulance in drive and put your foot on the brake. And when we get in, I'll be on the back and you just need to drive. And I'm like, okay. Well, when we pulled into this place, there were literally, sorry y'all, people like hanging off the trees, watching us, and it was very creepy and it was very scary, and that was kind of like my first creeped out moment. And of course, it was pouring down raining, and so that was my first creeped out moment, and it just kind of stuck with me, and I never really thought much about it. 2 years later, I got in a similar situation, and all of a sudden, that fear just kind of like stopped me for a minute. And I've had other things go on throughout my time in EMS, and it's those fears, and they just add up and they add up and they add up, and they create PTSD for me. Good morning, Melissa. They create that PTSD. Morning, Nakia. So my personal PTSD journey just came from accumulation of things over and over and over again in my life. I know this morning when I was talking to Michelle, I was talking to Damon, and Damon did some evac stuff when he was active duty. And I said, Damon, the hardest part for me was that I could watch this person, or I knew this person that had been drinking, had just gotten in a wreck and killed this entire family, and now I have to treat this person. Or I would go and I knew that a police officer had been shot by somebody, and the suspect got shot and with a non-life-threatening injury. And here's my police officer buddy who's always protected me, and he's gone. And now I'm having to treat the person that shot him. And Damon says, I understand, because we used to take prisoners on our aircraft that shot at our aircraft as we were landing, or shot other people, and that's why they were prisoners, and we had to take them and do the same thing. And I don't think you realize that mental toll that it takes on you, that mental toll that over time this takes on you. And the one thing I have found that if it has been a common thread, there are all kinds of symptoms of PTSD. There are so many. We think of the big ones: triggers, rage, depression, shutting down, whatever. But there's a ton of symptoms, and you only have to have 2, right? You don't have to have everything on the list. And so the one thing that I found was the common thread is validation. Those of us with PTSD need a sense of validation. We need a sense of being good. We need that sense of not failing again. I had a trauma early on in my childhood, my younger childhood, not like 2 or 3, but teenagers' childhood. And when you become that victim, even victims of, and talking to them as well, of sexual assault, they still need this validation. Okay? We all still need this validation. And sometimes the fear that we have of not being good enough, that fear that we have of not being good enough, paralyzes us, or stops us from going on, or creates this sense of, even if you're the victim of a sexual assault, a lot of times you're like, I'm not good enough to do this. I don't deserve this kind of love. I won't do this because I'm afraid I'll do it wrong. And so it paralyzes you. And the same thing happened in my EMS world. You know, the fear of not being good enough. We are junkies. We are adrenaline junkies in the EMS world. That is what we do. But there's always this fear that we're not good enough. And we needed that self-validation. So when it comes time to doing things, you know, when it comes time to doing things that we know need to be done, our rational brain says, yes, this needs to be done. It was like when it came time to renew my EMS license and I had to take this refresher. Yes, I knew it needs to be done. For crying out loud, I'm an instructor. Okay? It shouldn't have been hard. But in the rationale of my head, it was hard because that meant that I knew it had to be done, but if I didn't do it well enough, I would fail and I couldn't set myself back up for failure. So there's a rationale that goes on in your head that I think is the commonality in talking to so many people who have PTSD. And I'm not just talking about veterans, I'm talking about first responders, I'm talking about trauma survivors. I've transported a lot of them, I've had conversations with them, I've talked to veterans. The commonality is needing the validation and not being good enough. And sometimes fear of failing, fear of failing paralyzes us. So we do a couple of things. We shut down. How often do we hear that our rational brain says, well, my God, why can't they just get that done? It needs to be done. Do they not know it needs to be done? What the heck is wrong with them? Our rational brain says that because when we're not, especially when I'm not in that PTSD moment that's going on, right? And I don't always take myself out of me being whatever and put myself in that PTSD mindset to see what's going on. But we sit here so often and we say, well, come on, how hard is that? I just need you to fill out a piece of paper. Okay, well, sometimes it's filling out a piece of paper, maybe as simple as filling out the next thing for your claim, or filling out the next thing for your appointment, or filling out the next thing that you need done. But what happens? There's always, always, always the ramification that something can be negative about it. So in their mind, in my mind, you always put yourself, when you have this, you always put yourself in this situation that if I do this, am I going to be told again that I'm negative? Am I going to be told again, what if I do it wrong? What if I check off the wrong box? What if I don't do this right? What if I don't do that right? You know, we've talked about the whole thing with people and the military and their birth certificates and all this stuff that went on and on because of COVID. And now, you know, like they want kidneys and, I mean, I don't know what else these people want to get some of these people their stuff. But if all of a sudden you're told, you fill out the papers, you do the stuff, you send it in, and it's like, oh, sorry, you're not good enough to get your birth certificate. That's where you're at. So that fear of failure, that lack of validation sometimes paralyzes people. When the obvious thing is, just fill out the flipping form and be done. That's not always how we work. We have that need for validation. So things happen when we don't get that, or when we're afraid of validation, when we're afraid of failure. And it's not just about failing our mission. It is about mentally, we get in this space. I think that's one of the things that is the common thread among so many people is we fail. That is a huge issue. Do we fail? You know, I think back to the sexual assault issues and getting ready after those events happen. And you go and you get ready to go out with people. And you want to look good because you've gotten past this and you want to look good for the person you're going out with. And then you sit there and you spend hours and hours and hours trying on clothes because, one, you don't want to look too provocative because, you know, at some point you take self-blame. A lot of people take self-blame for sexual trauma. Did I look too provocative? Did I entice that? So we do that. And then it's like, well, but we still want to look good for them. So this mental thing about failure and this validation we have goes on. And before long, we got a stack of clothes on the bed that are 3 foot high. Okay? That's the same thing that we go, no matter what it is that we're doing, it's the lack of validation. It can be as simple as loading the dishwasher. I'm not going to load the dishwasher because I'm going to do it wrong. And there's this lack of validation. And we carry it. For me, we carry it. It's those things that create triggers. People are like, well, I mean, come on. If I had to just deal with knowing what the triggers were, I could do that. I have a list. I think I know what his triggers are by now. Okay, but then there's times I don't understand where this comes from. Have you ever had that moment where you know what their normal triggers are and all of a sudden you're shaking your head like, where the hell did that come from? Where did that come from? Well, it comes from this random lack of validation place. And it may not be a normal trigger. Okay, but the triggers and the explosions or the way they respond to the trigger, whether it's shutting down or having an explosion or saying ugly things or doing all those things, that is going to fluctuate from person to person. But that sense of feeling less worthy and needing validation is a commonality. It's a commonality that we don't address. At least in my experience, it's a commonality that we don't address. It's one of those things that we just don't address. And so, yeah, it's been hard at times. And especially with the last year and a half, and I've had to transition from not being a paramedic. Well, for a long time when I got sick, I was like, I deserve this. I made myself sick. I wasn't a good enough paramedic. Nobody's going to miss me doing my job. This is what happens. I now have no purpose. That all went on in my head, you know, and that lack of validation. And it wasn't until I ran into somebody that I had been around early in my career when we moved back here and sat down and said, my God, I miss you. You were the very best there was. That I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that because the negativity just took over who I was. And there were days, y'all, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't function. I had shut down. Or for no apparent reason, Carl would come to me and he'd say, what the hell set you off? I don't know. I was just biting your head off. But I didn't know what the reason was. But down deep, when I look back at it now, it was that I had lack of validation. And it wasn't necessarily coming from him. It was just in my own head, I carried that lack of validation. And it set me off. Y'all, I could turn into super bitch in the flip of a switch. And not do anything he's done. It's not about us fighting or arguing. It's about in my own head and these shutdown moments that they go through and these rage moments that they go through and the what the hell did this just happen? Where the hell did that come from? I realize now that I live it too. I live it too. And that is such a hard reality to accept that you're going through this moment too. And it's hard. And it's hard to be told you're not worthy. And it's hard to be thinking that you don't add up or that you don't have purpose. See, purpose driven is important. Being purpose driven is important. I know when I talked to Damon this morning, we were talking and he's like, you know, one of the things for him was he had situations that caused him to go to the military. Okay, and he was there and he did a great job. And when he comes home, there's not this loving, jumping up and down, welcoming family. He came home. Look at Richard. That Kurt honored. Oh my God, that was the greatest thing ever yesterday where Kurt Power honored him yesterday. But they weren't welcomed home. Okay, so now they feel like they've done something wrong. When I got sick and wasn't on an ambulance anymore, I didn't have all these EMS people coming over. Oh my God, you were such a great paramedic. We're going to miss you. Nope, they went on about their life. I mean, and they should, but they went on about their life. And I'm like, but how does EMS run without me, right? Yeah. We caregivers think they don't experience this, but they sure do. Self-worth depletes itself at times. It does. And people ask me all the time, can I have secondary PTSD from living with a veteran with PTSD? You can have PTSD from anything. Okay, understand the true definition is anything. But we have to keep our self-worth and not needing to feel validated. That's becoming stronger within ourselves. See, that's the one thing I learned. The one thing I learned was when I started to take care of me and when I started to realize that I had a purpose and I had value and it didn't require anybody else's validation, I was better. I handled things better. Do I still get in that down, depressed state? Yeah, I do, but I pop back out of it way quicker than I ever did before. I usually, a lot of us will call each other and say, hey, I just need to pick me up. And we do, and we talk, and we're fine, and we're going about our business because we just need that moment of validation. We don't really need a pick me up. We need a moment of validation. That's the truth behind it. We need a moment of you're doing an amazing job because that's what we need because we can't see that we're even doing an okay job. And that's what happens. But when your self-worth and you learn to love yourself and your self-assurance goes up, your validation, the requirement of validation from others goes down. As you get stronger in who you are, you don't need all the external validation. So think about when we flip it over now to the veteran side. How often do we say, you can't do this? Or how often do they fill out, come on, y'all. I know veterans that have been through 3, 4, 5 CMPs to try to get what they deserve, right? And so it's like somebody telling, oh, well, you got to do this or you've got to do that. Richard once told me, not Nakia's Richard, but another Richard told me yesterday, we were talking about it, or night before last, we were talking about it, and he said, it's almost like they want us to die so they don't have to deal with us. They want it to be too much for us so that we just stop. It's like they want it to be too hard so we don't go further. And you think about that as a validation criteria. You think about that as this validation that now you have to keep saying, hey, I'm worthy. No, the minute you became worthy was the minute you signed that piece of paper that said, I'm going to give up my life for the freedoms and for this country. That's the minute you became worthy because that's what you were promised. And that isn't what you're getting now. You have to prove your self-worth every minute of the day. No wonder they're in the place they're in because their validation from everything from the VA on down matters. People don't go to people who've been in the military like they used to and say thank you for your service. You wonder why. That Vietnam era was the eye-opening wake-up call, and it should have been the eye-opening and kept there, but it didn't. The eye-opening wake-up call to the world that these guys didn't choose what they fought and did, but they still fought and did because it was their duty and they honored their country. And I'm going to tell you what, some of the Vietnam era veterans are some of the most proudest of any veteran we have of their service, but they're also embarrassed by it at times. Some of them have the most deep love for their country, but they're also very embarrassed by it at times. And now you see the same thing happen in the world today. The veterans aren't caring. Army strong or whatever branch of service you're in, they're not going on their cars. As first responders, all of those stickers and all have all coming off of ours because we're not respected. So it's like we have to revalidate. And that's the part that sucks. You shouldn't have to revalidate to the world. So then we don't understand why they're in where they're in. It's because of this lack of validation. And so when we go into them and we say things without meaning to, like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why can't you just fill out this piece of paper and let's get it done? I mean, come on. I'm not saying they don't need to be accountable. I'm saying they do, but the way we approach it, and just totally changes it. And so sometimes it's that lack of stuff, and we're taking their validation and we're lowering it even further, just like when we reload the dishwasher. And I know that's hard. My mama still reloads the dishwasher. Actually, when I went up there this time, she said, "And look, Stacy, I left the dishes in the dishwasher just where you left them, and I didn't move them around." And I was like, "Yes." And then she says, which was like the deflation of the balloon, "But it's not how I would have done it." I was like, "Okay." And one of the other times she said to me, she said, "Why do you load the dishwasher this way? Why don't you load it from the back to the front?" I said, looked at her, I said, "Mama, does it matter? Are the dishes going to get washed?" "Well, yes." "Then does it matter what order I loaded them in?" "No, I guess not. But that's how you did it, but it doesn't make my way wrong, and it doesn't make your way right, and it doesn't screw up the validation. It is what it is." And we go on. The dishes got washed. And so it's all these little things that we do that screw up this validation, and that's what I had to learn. I had to learn that my self-worth and my validation didn't come from anybody else. It didn't come from my former employee. It didn't, employer. It didn't come from my coworkers. Okay? Okay, it didn't come from my coworkers. It didn't come from any of that. My validation had to come from me. My validation had to come from me. I had done something just the other week, and I was super proud of what happened. Super proud. And I was like bouncing up and down. I was super proud. And I said to Carl, I said, "We did this." And he was like, "Okay." And I got mad and I said, "Aren't you proud of me? I just need you." He said, "I'm proud of you every day. I shouldn't have to tell you." And that was like, boom. But I needed that validation. I needed that validation. I needed to be validated in that moment. Well, hello, he didn't know that. So I got all pissified over it. And you have to stop. You have to learn that it's okay. But they've got to learn that their self-validation comes from them. And that is about lifting them up and encouraging. And I'm not saying do, because we already know what happens when we enable, right? Eggshells, enabling, manipulation. But that's where I'm at, y'all. Y'all didn't realize where I was. I was so deep in needing validation. I was so deep in needing validation that I wanted to take my own life. And the truth of it was in needing my personal validation. And I can understand. I've never been a combat veteran, but I can understand that deep need for needing validation after going through what I went through and having my own PTSD. I get it. I get it. And that's why it's so important that we understand how it works. I love you people. I ain't got a dishwasher. Oh, I do. This is dish and this is washer. Okay? And there is but it is funny because there's a certain way that I wash the dishes in the sink. They have to be washed in a certain order. So I can't say anything about loading the dishwasher, I guess. I have dish and washer, and I wash them in a certain order. That's where I wanted to go today. I wanted you to understand the one commonality. The one commonality is the feeling of needing validation. We already feel broken. Okay? We already feel broken. We already have moments that we feel less worthy. We already have all of those having PTSD. And then you compound it, it makes it worse. But by the same side, as us, just people, we struggle with self-worth. We struggle with self-value. But I will tell you the single greatest thing I did for me, PTSD-wise, person-wise, everything-wise, was learning to love myself. And when I started to do that, everything else became more manageable. When I started to love myself, everything else became more manageable. There is no doubt I love Carl. There is no doubt he loves me. And I can tell him 1,000,000,000 times I love him. But if he is in that space where he feels unloved at times or unworthy at times, nothing I say is going to change that. If I'm in that space, nothing he says is going to change that. It comes from yourself. That's where it comes from. Self-validation. We have to learn to find it. Our veterans will learn to find it. We have to learn to find it. And when you learn self-validation, all the rest of the crap seems to go away or get more manageable. And there are going to be times that you need somebody to pick you up and tell you, come on, girlfriend, let's get through this. We got this together. And that's okay. You know, I think it's precious when Nikia's had a bad day and we're talking. And Nikia's had a bad day and Richard will say, well, I won't say, he kind of hollered, Nikia, I'm going to take you out to eat. Well, in his heart, it is such the right thing. His heart is like, Nikia, you deserve this. And he sees this. But what he doesn't see and realize is that means Nikia has to go pick it up, bring it back, or take Richard with her, which is still, and I'm not saying it's a challenge for that, but you know, that means loading people up, getting in the car, going to where you're going to go, sitting there, having it. So sometimes it's just easier to fix taters and weenies in the wok. But the fact that he says that to her, to me, is always so precious, because he validates at that moment that he sees that Nikia needs a break. And I think that it is so precious when he says, I really think it's because he wants hot dogs from the Sam's Club, but you know. But I think it is so precious that he does that. And it's about validation. And for him, he may not physically be able to do for her, but when he says, I'm going to take you out to eat, even if it means her going and picking it up, for him, it is him taking care of her and seeing that she needs something. And so there's that validation in his mind and in his heart. And that's just the way we step back and see it. So I'm going to get off here. It is raining. We're hoping the rain stops. I have things to do. Don't forget Let's Talk tonight. I will put this stuff on there. Anybody who has not gotten the application and has sent us an email, please resend it or message us And make sure it's loving my veteran and it's spelled right, because I did it wrong. And the first thing, I spelled it with 2 T's instead of an R. Um, the applications are still going out. We still have a few more spaces. And then on Monday, there'll be a lot of stuff starting to come out to everybody who's taking boot camp. Kind of like your list when you go to MEPS and you start getting your little list of what you got to have. We're just going to kind of get on it that way. All right, y'all. I hope everybody has a blessed day. Remember, you don't need validation from an outside source. You can validate yourself right from yourself. It's in your heart. It's what you know about yourself. Learn to self-love. Self-love is key. Self-love is key. And when you learn to love yourself, everything else seems to get a little better along this world. I'm Stacy. This has been Walking in My Shoes. Y'all have a blessed day. Bye.